Hey guys, welcome back. So for the first two sections, we went through an overview of plyometric training and what that means mechanically. And then we did sort of a needs analysis. What do we need to be able to do, or our athletes need to be able to do more importantly, before we begin this journey of plyometric training and developing plyometric movement? So we've gone through these first two sections and now we're going to start the journey. Okay, so what are we applying? Now, when I like to think of applying plyometric training with juniors, I like to think of development over results. So I'm more worried about the development of them physically than I am about their results. That can mean results on the pitch, that can mean results physically, but we're really looking at developing this idea of rate of force development and then also developing this idea of quality of movement. So we want them to have the techniques and give them the tools to be able to move at a high level. And then this hopefully will feed into their performance, where we're preparing them to move for high level performance and at high coordinated levels. And then we are looking to increase their strength and increase everything else alongside those things. So quality of movement is a big, big part of my junior development idea. Now, this hierarchy here just gives you sort of a breakdown of how I like to rank the coordination almost of my training methods. So we're looking at landing, jump, jump and land, drop, jump and land. So as we go down through the hierarchy, we're going from least coordinated to most coordinated plyometric style movements. Obviously, the more jumps you repeat, the higher the coordination level. Okay. But this is kind of the hierarchy I like to work off of when I'm programming with a new group or with juniors, almost as a checklist of what can they do? Where do I need to stop? Where do we need to work? Okay. Now, what's the rationale? Now, like I said before, we're looking at movement preparation for high level performance. Okay. So we can obviously expect an increase in physical athletic ability. After the first two sections of this presentation, we know the adaptations through plyometric training are surrounded around rate of force development, strength, power, coordination. Okay. So I like to think of this more as we're trying to work the coordination of the athlete and the rate of force development. Now, strength will obviously come along with those things, but we need to really think about the quality of the movement and how quickly and the intent our athletes are showing within each jump. Now, injury risk, very important point. When we do plyometric training, if we do this in the right level and we're challenging our athletes, their bodies, not the team's body, their body. I spent 2-3 years in volleyball school where I had patellar tendonitis. And that was because the individual training load for me was too high. For the team, it wasn't too high. There was only 2 or 3 of us who were injured, but only 2 or 3 in a junior team, for me, is still too many. So we really need to think about how we adapt intensity, how we adapt volume for each individual athlete. If I need to slow someone down, I slow them down. I let everyone else pick their own speed almost. And then we obviously get to a point where, okay, I don't want you to do a 60 centimeter drop jump because I know that that's not the best idea for you. Then we need to look at intent. So we go quality of movement first, intent of the movement, then we start to really load them. Okay, an important point also with the injury risk. This comes hand in hand with leg stiffness. Now, through plyometric training, we develop leg stiffness. So when you develop leg stiffness, what has been shown in the literature is that leg stiffness development and an increase in leg stiffness actually reduces the amount of force absorbed in the tendinous structures. So if we reduce the amount of force absorbed in the tendinous structures, we increase the amount of force absorbed in the muscles. Now, this is obviously ideal for us. At a junior level, we want to be developing leg stiffness and coordination, most importantly. These two things are really going to funnel into the high level performance. So we're really going to make sure that we are working the muscular structures and coordination, which drips into almost every aspect of physical ability, motor control, skill acquisition. Obviously, we're going to look to increase rate of force development. Again, like I said, this comes a lot through coaching cues. And for me, this is the most fun point of coaching, is that I really get to direct my athletes, and their ability to complete plyometric activities goes hand in hand with my ability to be able to cue them to show intent, cue them to be aggressive, cue them to go 100%. And that's where we want to be. We want to be pushing our athletes to 100% of physical performance. Okay, and obviously patellar tendonitis, like I said before, was because of an overload of the ligament structures. We increase leg stiffness, we decrease force absorbed at the tendinous structures. Okay, so this is my idea for a session with junior development teams. Now, these are looking at low-level, low-coordinated plyometric movements where we're really trying to disassociate almost parts of the stretch shortening cycle, but at the same time keep them together. So toe taps, we will have videos of all of these. And just bear in mind the sets and repetitions. So I don't want too many sets, and the repetitions are quite high. We're looking at movement and skill acquisition. Okay, so if you have a calculator with you, you feel free to work it out. But we know that for a beginner level, we want between 80 and 100 foot contacts for volume prescription. So we obviously adapt the sets and repetitions around this and around our athletes. If I have an athlete who can do 6 fantastic toe taps, maybe I'll let him have a little bit more rest and do 4 sets of those toe taps instead. So he can rest in between 6 reps. This can be very individual. I might have one athlete who does 12 perfect toe taps. Okay, we can do 2 sets of toe taps and get a little bit more volume, get a little bit more repetition in that system. And that can also start to increase the loading. And also we're really challenging the coordination of how many times can I consistently show the intent of 100% foot contact. Okay, so this is just an idea. Toe taps, single leg RDL to jump, seated box jump, and ice skaters. Now I like to build my sessions with 1 double leg activity in the vertical plane, 1 single leg activity in the vertical plane, 1 double leg activity in the vertical plane, and then this is a single leg activity in the lateral plane. So I like to look at lateral and vertical movement. Mainly I base mine around jumping because I'm more using and needing to use jumps to develop physical ability because of the state of volleyball and the needs of volleyball surround around jumping. Okay, so toe taps, first exercise. Okay, so notice how we want stiff legs. We're looking for a quick, sharp contact on the floor. And also, when we look at coaching cues, watch the toes. We're trying to pull the toes up and brace for another landing. So one thing that I like to have my athletes visualize is that your toes are on pieces of string, because naturally we want to lift our arms up when we jump. So imagine you're pulling your toes up with pieces of string. Okay, and then we want to prepare for the next jump, and we want sharp contacts. You can stand on the side, you can clap, but we really want our athletes to visualize this. We have to have our coaching cues. So important for intent, so important for developing this idea of constant feedback for the athlete. They can hear your coaching cues, they can try and decipher that into what they're doing in their movements. Okay, so pull the toes up with pieces of string, sharp contacts, anticipate the landing. Okay, single leg RDL to jump. Now this is quite a different movement pattern when we think about it. This is going to be a hinge into a jump. So we're really going to be trying to use this idea of the triple extension through the hips to try and get the jump and drive into the air. And then the landing, obviously, we want in a quarter squat. Okay, so I like to have my athletes do alternate legs. Okay, so here we're challenging balance, we're challenging coordination, and we're challenging the idea of getting into this triple extension position and applying force and absorbing load on a single leg in a vertical plane. Okay. Notice how he's really trying to push the hips through and up into the movement. Okay. So the way that I like to get my athletes to visualize this is we hinge and then we thrust through with the hips. So I like to use the word thrust a lot with my athletes. This is really just to get the idea of using the hips and using the glutes to finish the movement. Okay, then obviously we need to make sure that we have a stiff landing in a quarter squat position. Okay, seated box jump. Now this is more looking at the concentric phase and concentric force application. It's a very good exercise for that. Now, I like to have my athletes start with their feet off the floor to almost mimic a foot contact. Okay. Now we're trying to get our athletes to leave the floor as quick as possible. They're in quite a compromised position, so this can borderline more on the slow plyometric scale. But as we can see, we want our athletes to imagine that we're having a fast contact on the floor. So we want them to anticipate the jump. We want them to anticipate the foot contact. So I like to simply say, as soon as you contact the floor, you're jumping. As soon as you contact the floor, you're trying to get off the floor. Okay? Really trying to get this idea of fast foot contact, strong concentric contraction. Okay? And obviously landing a quarter squat on the box. This athlete rushes a little bit. I'd like to see them stand up, take their time and come down. He's rushing. Okay, we want to avoid rushing when we're doing plyometric activity. We want them to focus on quality, not quantity and speed. Okay, we want them to focus on speed of movement, of course, but not speed of I need to get this set done, speed of I need to leave the floor fast. Okay, then ice skaters, last activity. Okay, this is lateral coordination, lateral stability. Okay, quite simply looking to keep the knee, ankle, hips, and shoulders in line with the center of mass. Looking to try and absorb and then drive out of that position. Okay, so we don't want them to land too straight over the leg. We want them to be able to apply force back in the opposite direction. This does not mean that the knee collapses. This means that the knee stays in a straight line. As you can see here, he does a good job of when he lands, he absorbs into a quarter squat and then drives out. Okay. Now, obviously, speed of this movement is going to dictate how the intensity goes. But you can imagine that the reason it's called ice skaters is this is kind of the movement you see with speed skating, kind of this position of being a single leg and ready to drive out. So the coaching cues for this one, you want everything in line and you want a nice drive out in the same plane. So we're looking more for solid landing, drive out, knee, ankle, hip in line with the center of mass. Okay, so we almost want to keep that almost a little bit of a lean towards the center. So you can simply use like an ice skater, okay, like a speed skater, like you're ice skating on one leg. Okay, so how can we progress and regress this session? So I've left a bank of videos in with the reading resources. It should be in a separate folder, and in there most of these exercises are. If there isn't an exercise with a video of this name, then please Google them, because when we look into progress and regress exercises, we're looking at the individuality also of the athlete. So I've given some ideas here. So toe taps, to increase the coordination, increase the loading, we go to single leg toe taps. Like I said before, when we go to double to single leg, we make it more intense and more challenging for the coordination. To regress, we look at going back to A skips, A march. We're looking more at coordination, less focus on intensity, less focus on rate of force development and producing force. We're looking more for the coordination aspect. Now, you can read down through, obviously, single leg RDL, we can go from single leg back to double leg, also to regress. And then we can go from single leg, singular jump, to single leg RDL, to box jump. So we change the focal point. The focal point now is on increasing the jump height to get up to a box, and also increasing the plane, changing the plane a little bit. We're going from pure vertical to vertical with a little horizontal movement as well. So seated box jump, this here, we can look at increasing the range of motion to increase the how challenging the exercise is and how coordinated the exercise is. So to progress, we go to box jump, which means we're no longer seated, we start in a standing position. And then to regress, we can just go to a seated jump. So we take away the box, we just get them to drive out of the seated position and jump straight up in the air and land. Okay, so then with ice skaters, we can look then again to progress by increasing the repetitions of jumping. So we go from ice skater to broad jump. Okay, also when we do this idea of lateral to horizontal movement, we're changing how the athlete is going to need to absorb and reapply force. So this is a progression. And then to regress, we just go to hop and hold. So we slow the movement down and we really try and get them to focus on the positions they need to hit to be successful in this technique. Okay, so our considerations for programming. Now, when we program, when we are using plyometric activities, we know they're highly coordinated. Our verbal and visualization cues need to be on point. We need to make sure that for every activity, we can have 2 or 3 buzzwords that we use with our athletes that mean that they can instantly go, okay, I get it. I can see that in my head. It makes perfect sense to me. So it might be completely different for your athletes than it is for mine. Now you need to build this up. You need to build this up through your demonstrations. I got told a great thing from an S&C coach a long time ago and a volleyball coach. If you can't demonstrate something, get someone who can. There's no room for bad demonstrations. We cannot be wrong with our demonstrations. We need to have our verbal and visualization cues on point. They need to be right. They need to be fast. They need to drill into our athletes and get them to visualize what we want them to do and how we want them to move. Okay? Quality always first. I've said this a million times and I'll say it again. Always quality of movement. We want our athletes to be prepared for high-level plyometric movements. That means quality has to come first. If we sacrifice some foot contacts for more quality, do it. Slow and steady. Slow and steady wins the race is quite a big saying out there, but it could not be more true for plyometrics. Build them up slowly. Let them be a little bored with a couple of activities, but regress them and progress them. Really adapt this idea of where the intensity is, challenge their movement patterns. Like I said before, when we're looking at manipulating, progressing and regressing, these are the things that I like to think about, put down into a graphic. Okay, so range of motion, number of foot contacts, single leg versus double leg, jumping intensity, so that's how high we're jumping, how fast we're jumping, what plane we're jumping in, landing intensity, how high we're jumping to land, how high we're dropping from, what plane we need to absorb load in, and then repeated versus singular. So this is the idea of repeated jumps versus singular jumps. Now, this is how I like to think about adapting intensity and adapting almost volume of the session, and how I change my exercises in a progression and regression model is using these ideas. Range of motion. So if I increase the range of motion, I increase the coordination needed, so I increase the intensity. Number of foot contacts. Simply, more foot contacts, more intensity, more volume. Single leg versus double leg changes the loading patterns. Single leg generally more intense than double leg. Jumping intensity, obviously overhead goals, height of the box, distance I'm asking them to broad jump. Landing intensity, how high we're dropping them from. The higher, the more intense the movement. And then repeated versus singular. The more jumps I ask them to do in a row, the more intense the movement's going to be. Okay. Well, thank you very much for listening. The next section will be on building to elite athletic performance.